Agribusiness brought to you by SureCrop, quality liquid crop nutrition delivered right to your farm.
You're watching Ag AM in Kansas. Well, after over a decade of research, K-State animal scientists have discovered that by feeding a specific grain to feedlot cattle, the beef from those cattle ends up with a high content of a healthful human nutrient, omega-3 fatty acids by name. And this discovery originated with cattle feeding research begun several years back by K-State feedlot nutritionist Jim Drouillard.
We were doing research looking at the health-promoting effects of flaxseed in cattle that are subject to respiratory disease at certain points in their life. We had noted some improvements in health of the animals, and in particular their ability to regulate blood glucose. And as a follow-up, we ended up doing some work with finishing cattle. And as part of that finishing work, we looked at the carcasses and had discovered that the carcasses contained much higher levels of the omega-3 fatty acids.
Let's paint the picture a little more clearly here as to the value of omega-3 fatty acids in the human diet now.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a lot of interest, I think, in the health medical community as well as among human nutritionists concerning the utility or the necessity for omega-3 fatty acids in the diet. You hear values of 1,200 to 1,600 milligrams per day intake for the adult human being. The typical sources have been fish and or cereal type products like flax. But we really haven't had much in the way of contribution from red meat products. And so this looked like maybe an interesting way to add another choice to people's diet in terms of satisfying that need for omega-3 fats.
So you said about exploring how this conversion takes place in the beef product itself then, right?
Yes, so it's not something that's added to the beef, it's something that we alter their diet. So we incorporate ingredients into the diet that themselves contain omega-3 fatty acids, such as flaxseed. That's a very rich source of omega-3 fatty acids. And so adding 5 to 10% flaxseed to the diet, we can get maybe a 10 or 12-fold increase in the omega-3 content of the beef. So. Yeah, and I guess that's from the human side of it. From the cattle side, there appear to be some health benefits there as well. So,
in terms of controlling respiratory disease?
Yes, just inflammatory diseases in general. It seems to their ability to cope with that seems to be improved.
Is the omega-3 fatty acid content then in the animal concentrated in any one particular cut? Is it throughout the carcass?
Well, it's really concentrated in the fat. It is a component of the fat, and so the parts of the carcass that tend to have a lot more fats would tend to be richer in the omega-3s. Some of the organ meats, the heart tissue, the liver tissue also tend to sequester quite a bit of this without necessarily having a lot of fat. So, it does localize itself in certain parts of the carcass.
Agribusiness brought to you by Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by Kansas farmers.
And what's being touted now is the unveiling soon on a commercial scale of an enriched ground beef product which can brag, if you will, or boast of these omega-3 fatty acid contents.
Sure. It's been probably 10 years ago that we were well on our way in terms of researching this topic and understood the ability to increase the omega-3 fats in the beef, but that's what universities do well. What we don't do well is take things to the commercial sector, right? So it really takes an entrepreneur or someone that has a vision to really change the food industry to do that. So we at that point had contacted a local individual that had been involved in the meat business for years, was very successful in introducing some other new meat categories into the retail shelf, and that was Bernie Hansen. So Bernie's a local guy and had just sold his company and so needed a new job, I guess, is the way we looked at it. So we've actually been working with Bernie and his folks for the better part of 10 years on the project to get it commercialized.
And we're near that point now of seeing this product?
My understanding is that they're planning to introduce this into some markets yet this month, and then they'll roll it out into additional markets later in the year.
So you've been after this for quite some time, a decade or so. It's pretty
Yeah, at
exciting to
least.
see the end result, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, there's some gratification in it, certainly to see the work of a lot of undergraduate students and graduate students that contributed along the way, and to ultimately see that make its way to the retail shelf. Yeah, there's some gratification there for sure.
Jim, of course, you are a feedlot nutritionist, so there is the production interest here. When you feed flaxseed to the typical feedlot animal, do we see differences in performance as compared to, say, a more conventional feedstuff like corn?
We do. I mean, they're not dramatic differences, but generally speaking, the flaxseed, because it contains a lot of oil, oil is very high in energy, and so it's one way of increasing the energy density of the diet. So we typically see a bit of an improvement in efficiency when we incorporate it into the diet and replace something like corn or sorghum or another cereal grain.
So it's a positive, really.
It is. It's more expensive than the cereal grains that it replaces by a fair bit. So the cost of production is probably flat. There's some improvements in efficiency, maybe some improvements in health, and that tends to compensate for the additional cost.
And the cost, in part, has to go back to the accessibility of flaxseed, doesn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's grown in a fairly small region in the U.S. I would say 90+% of the U.S. production comes out of North Dakota. So it's got a few miles on it before it gets to a Kansas feed yard.
That all said, how do you perceive this product as it arrives on the shelves, as consumers consider it? Is it going to be a niche market? Could it be broader than that?
Well, I think for now it's probably a niche market, but for certain the omega-3 enriched foods has been a very large market in general, and it's mostly been in the form of cereal-based products. So whether it be breakfast cereals or breads, or but grain-based products that would contain flaxseed or other sources of omega-3 fats. There have really been fairly few choices in the way of animal proteins. We've been pretty much limited to fish in that sense. And so we think that it probably is an important change, and that it gives people just one more means of incorporating that in the diet. And there are a number of pretty health conscious consumers out there that are looking for that sort of thing. So yeah, we think that can be at the very least a profitable niche for some, and maybe it'll grow into something quite a bit larger.
That's K-State feedlot nutritionist Jim Drouillard on the storyline behind the unveiling of a new commercial beef product, ground beef, high in omega-3 fatty acid content, and the steps in research at K-State that led to that discovery. You're watching Ag AM in Kansas.